There are times when we want to be able to insert several items into a container. We usually use variables to hold values such as integers and strings, booleans, and etc. But if we wanted to, say, have a list of integers and then be able to access each item by referencing an index or an ID, we would need a different kind of container. We would need what they call an array. So an array is simply a list with containers we can use to insert values and then be able to access those values by pointing to an index or an ID. So let's take a look here. So we have this container, this outer container here, or indexes, and then we have, inside of the container, we have these elements. So inside of these elements, that's where we can put values. So we can put hello here, and the second one we can say hey, and so forth, or put an integer. We can say 1, 6, 7, 10, and so forth. Now in code, when we want to be able to then access these values we have inserted into these little containers, inside these main containers, we just loop through the index, loop through all these IDs here to be able to access those elements. And notice also here, the first item or the first element of our array, it starts at 0, not at 1. That's one thing to always look out for in programming language, especially in Java. Everything starts at 0. So when I say I want the first element, it's 0th element. Alright, now let's go ahead and take a look in code. Okay, as usual, let's go ahead and create a new project. So right click, new, Java project. We're going to call Java Arrays. Just go finish. And here we are, we have our project. So right click, com.java programs.java arrays. Finish. And let's create our class with the main method. Go to main. I'm going to call it Java Arrays. Okay, finish. And of course, Eclipse will give us something to work with. Okay, so how do we initialize arrays? Very simple. Of course, you can use different types to create arrays. You can say integers, strings, booleans, and so forth. Now we're going to start with int. We're going to go int, and then we're going to put square brackets that will represent that we are about to create an array of integers, and we're going to give a name for our array. We're going to call my array, and we're going to add equal. So we're going to then put some values. We put then our curly braces, and inside those curly braces, remember we talked about all those elements, those little squares inside those little containers. That's where we are putting our containers here. So the first container or element is going to be, let's say, 3, comma, because now we're going to go and put another element, 5, comma, and 6. So this array has length of 3. That's it. You've created an array of integer and you named it my array. Now how do we go and get those values from our array? So get array values. Create a for loop so that it can go through the entire array, the entire container, and spit out our values. So what we do, we say then for int I is equal to 0. Again, I'm initializing my for loop here, int I, and then I say I is less than my array. Again, this is my array that we called here, named here, and we're going to get the length of that array. So you say dot, so we're accessing certain functions. So my array dot length, semicolon, I plus plus. And then of course we have our curly braces there. And inside of here we're going to go system.out.println, and we're going to say array values, and then we're going to just go ahead and say my array, square brackets. Inside of those brackets we put an I. So what's happening here, we're saying, well, we first of all, in our for loop, we said we're initializing our I, which is going to be used to iterate through the array, and then we say if I is less than the length of this array, so if I is less than 3, then we just go ahead and increment our I. In this for loop, we are initializing our I iterator that are going to be used to iterate through the array, and we're saying if I is less than the length of this array here, which is 3, and then we go ahead and increment that I by 1, and then we spit out that element at that position. So the first run, I is 0, so 0 is indeed less than 3. So this I here is going to be 0, which means it's going to go and take our first element here, because as you remember presentation earlier, the first element of an array is in container number 0. The first run is going to be 0, which means it's going to go and get 3. The second time, now I is 1, I is still less than 3, so then this is 1, which means it's going to go and take the second one, and the second time around is going to go and get its third one, which is 6. That's all that's happening. Now let's save this and run and see in our console the results. So run as a Java application. We see this here. There we go. Array values 3, 5, 6. Great. Now we could do the same if we wanted to create, let's say, strings, arrays of strings. So you do the same thing. We're going to go my strings is equal to, and then we put there our curly braces, and of course strings are inside a double quotes. We can say hey, comma, there, comma, I, comma, love, comma, Android. And then semicolon here to finish our statement. All we have to do is just change to my strings, because that's the one we want to iterate through. Now just copy this and go. So now if we go, let's change this to array values, and of course it's going to be my strings again. And if we save this, it's going to go ahead and go through all of these elements inside of this my strings array. So let's go ahead and run. You say, hey there, I love Android. What if we also wanted to be able to go ahead and get the index of each element? So what we could do is very simply, the index of course is just the ID where each element resides. You can just add, say, well, before that you can say then put at index and then plus, you can say just I. All I'm doing here is as this runs, as this for loop iterates through the array, I'm just taking that I and output that. And of course that I is going to be our index. Alright, so let's save this and keep and run. So it says at index 0, array values is hey. Right? Because it's 0 here, it's hey. And it goes ahead and say index 1, array value is there. And goes I is on index 2 and so forth. Now you've learned how to create arrays and how to iterate through or go and fetch all the values and index of the array. This is the way arrays work, and that's it. There's really not much to it. Alright, so I'll see you in the next video.